Dynamics 365 as a capability in the Power Platform, but all of the different components, Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI, all of these amazing, amazing things. But everybody goes ahead and they build apps and they build systems and they create data structures that are appropriate to use, but not everybody starts thinking about the impact of the data. And in today's day and age, with GDPR and things like the California Privacy Consumer Act and a variety of other legislations across the world, data privacy is paramount when designing systems. In fact, as a solution architect, normally one of my first questions when looking at a project is, what data security considerations do we need to understand? So the aim of this session is to talk a bit about data privacy. And we're not going to be talking about data privacy specifically within the Power Platform, i.e., things like security roles, ensuring that people get access to it. We're going to be talking about the wider technical ecosystem. So just a bit about myself. My name is Kalman. I'm a Microsoft MVP. Was awarded in 2020, so now 3 years running for it. My nominal online is the CRM Ninja. As you can see, a common thread across all my social stuff. I blog regularly. I'm active on Twitter, on LinkedIn, YouTube. I have this great little logo and animation sequence that I use in my videos for it. And I also host a weekly TV show. Well, not quite TV show. It's not on the TV. It's hosted on YouTube, but it's called the Oops Factor, which is where people come and share their experiences of when things have gone wrong and lessons learned. We're coming up soon for 150 episodes. It's crazy to think that it's been running for around 4 years. If any of you are interested in coming to join, please feel free to reach out, and I'd love to have you on it. But enough about me. Let's start and understand, what about data leakage? And I like to go down what I refer to as memory lane, because nowadays we're digital first, right? I mean, we have our phones, tablets, computers, we take notes on it, although I still actually take notes during meetings, sometimes on a pad of paper next to me. But if we go back, whether it's 10 years, 20 years, 30 years or so, data leakage escaping wasn't specifically about computer systems. No, it was stuff like this: people walking around, people leaving folders with printouts on a train or in an airport, or people, government ministers turning up to government offices. This is an example of it, with their notes displayed, and any photographer could get a picture. If in high enough resolution, they could blow it up and see important notes around it. So that's a very good example of data leakage, but that really only affects, it was the person who lost it, whoever came across it or was able to see it. And then it would only get exposure really when it got into the national press. Otherwise, it was, I wouldn't say absolutely contained, but the number of people that it would affect was not necessarily in the immediate sense, a massive amount for it. So this is, the original sort of data leakage itself. Obviously, it could have a seriously great impact. But then we started to move into the digital realm, and hopefully everybody remembers what one of these are, admittedly not quite to scale: USB drives. Now, again, this started to get a bit more complicated and a bit more impactful, because if you're taking around a notebook with notes in it, it's only what you've actually written down. And let's face it, people aren't carrying hundreds of thousands of records that they've written down in a notebook. Maybe a printout, a couple of 100 pages, but even so, the data is limited. But then you got onto USB drives. And I remember when USB drives first started to make a consumer impact, somebody asked me, because I had my own little IT company at the time. Somebody asked me to order a USB drive for them, and I went, great, not a problem. It was a 128 megabyte USB drive, and at the time it retailed for £110. That's approximately $140 at that time, and obviously, exchange rates can fluctuate. For 128 megabytes, I look now at my multi-terabyte server and I think, oh gosh, right, things have moved on a little since. But USB drives could hold a lot more information, and definitely at the beginning they were not encrypted. Trying to buy an encrypted USB drive, no, it didn't work. And people used to, again, lose these. They were really small, so if they slipped out of your case, you wouldn't know. Rather than losing a massive folder, little thing in your pocket, yep, you wouldn't know it was there. In fact, penetration testing actually used to occur when penetration testing companies would leave USB drives just lying around in an office or in a car park and just see how many people actually plug them into their system to be able to get access. But this started to give the potential for a lot more data leakage, because a lot more records could be saved, and security of it. Okay, you could protect an Excel worksheet or a Word document, but even so, most people just didn't. But again, it had to be physically lost, and then somebody had to actually find it. So there's still that physical part of it. And that's where things started off going digital. Nowadays, however, we're cloud first. Everybody thinks cloud first. Power Platform is cloud first. You want to run on premise, you're going to have limited capabilities. Dynamics 365, again, you can still install it for on premise, but the capabilities are behind the cloud release by a year or two, and it's not all the full capabilities for it. Now, when we use the expression cloud, our data is in the cloud, we can work in the cloud. It's got nothing to do with the white fluffy things, or in the case of England at the moment, the very grey, dark looking things that are sort of hovering overhead for it. Data isn't actually stored, in the heavens somewhere for it, or in the physical clouds. It's actually stored in a computer somewhere, or computer systems. There are lots of these. Now, you could have private cloud, you're putting your own cloud infrastructure in place, got it, fine, but you're connected to the internet generally. There is a massive global network of servers, right? From DNS servers for, encompassing all our DNS queries that are going on to look up and resolve web addresses, things like that. All of the, I don't know how many zottabytes of information that are around in Amazon or in Microsoft and with the other clouds. These are all around the place, right? We don't have any control of them. Now, most cloud resources can be accessed through a browser. Right? You log into your email. Gmail, for instance, my personal email is on Gmail. I log in. Doesn't matter where I am in the world, I log in. I'm not hosting it. Google's got it somewhere floating around and ensures that I have access to it. Microsoft Office as well has that in place. You log into your Office email or into Hotmail if you're a personal consumer, possibly. Power Platform as well. You can just log in. Although there are controls around, you can ensure from a corporate point of view, which country you're in, which IP address are you on a corporate laptop or not. But this is all in the cloud. Yahoo Mail, Dropbox, OneDrive, all of these data storage things, they're in the cloud. So how do we go ahead and we handle data in the cloud? How do we handle, we're backing up data to ensure, that we have business recovery, business started recovery concepts for it. We're transferring data across systems. Is it, it comes down to my local computer or not, or is it just I'm accessing at the cloud? How do we control access into it? There is a massive amount of data in this whole cloud thing. And again, cloud is sort of a buzzword. I remember when it first came out in the 2000s or so, when it started to get into the consumer realm. It was a great concept. So many people have so many different ideas of what it actually is when it comes to talking about cloud itself. But with all our data out there in the cloud, we need to control access to it. Obviously, things like, logging in, so having authentication for it, and possibly multi-factor authentication, though nowadays, hopefully, multi-factor authentication on the top of it. But that's still our data in the cloud. So how can we ensure security of it? So what is DLP? Good acronym, right? So some people have heard of this before, some people haven't. If you haven't, don't worry, I'm good. This is the aim of the session to explain it. So DLP stands for Data Loss Prevention. Think of it as like leakage, right? You want to ensure your data, wherever it is, doesn't leak out and is unsecure of it. And this is the aim of the capability that we're going to be talking about in today's session, because DLP is a really important concept from an IT administration, a data governance point of view. It's not specifically for the users themselves, although we're going to talk about how it will affect the users, but being able to understand DLP in today's modern cloud-first world is absolutely imperative. And there's a really simple matter. There's a really simple reason behind this. And this is because organizations need to think of where is your data. See, you're not just using one location for your data. Yep, we're using Microsoft. Great, that's there. You're going ahead, you're probably using Google as a search engine. Maybe you have a personal OneDrive, that's Microsoft, but that's outside of it. Maybe you're going into different areas. And the way I like to think of this is each provider, each cloud system is an island for it. Now, some of those could be internal islands, some could be external islands. So this is the way that I like to think of your data for it. You are going to, as a matter of course, you're going to be using it. You've got WhatsApp, you're using WhatsApp, which you could be using in a professional capacity for it to, ensure communications that people want to raise with the organization for it. That is an island of data. WhatsApp belongs to Facebook, well, now called Meta. Not quite sure where in terms of the company structure, but that's there. Instagram again goes into there. And again, organizations will use this professionally, but the data is there. It's not all stored in just one place that they want to. Data is going to be across a number of different places. So the first thing to understand from a data protection point of view is, where is your data actually being stored, which services are those services belonging to a single company, like for instance Instagram and WhatsApp belonging to Facebook or Meta. You've got Microsoft Cloud, you could have Amazon Cloud. Some organizations will actually have a multi-cloud approach, just in case one provider goes down, they're replicating data out into different cloud services, just so they've got it there. So they'll be using Microsoft and Amazon, and there are actually third-party services which enable backup into multiple clouds just to ensure that everything is there, and possibly into a private cloud as well. So understanding where your data is the really important first step. And this is a review that any organization should go ahead and do to ensure that they're on top of it. But just because your data is in these different data islands, how do you talk to them? And the answer, in the Power Platform point of view, are connectors. Connectors connect, as the name suggests, between point A to point B. So in the Power Platform, we have lots of connectors that are available, out-the-box connectors. So we have things like obviously the Dataverse connector, we have things like a SharePoint connector, a Microsoft 365 connector, an Outlook connector, non-Microsoft, SQL connector in the wider Microsoft realm. We have other connectors as well. So we have connectors into Amazon, into Google, into LinkedIn, into Dropbox, into OneDrive, into Twitter. We've got all of these connectors that are available for us to be able to use. Now, it's not just about the connectors that Microsoft provides to us. We can create custom connectors. If there is an API available, we can create a custom connector to connect into it. So the connectors are the bridges between us as the user and our data islands. And this is where we're going to be focusing on today specifically. Now, connectors can be region-based, so just be aware if you're developing across multi-Power Platform regions, just because you have a connector in one region doesn't mean it's going to be available in another region. And they are also continually released by Microsoft. He's a good friend of mine, Peter. He actually tracks this automatically because he talks a lot about the automation capability and Power Automate for it, of course. And he tracks between every 4 to 8 days, right? And this is based on the last 2 years that I've been watching this happen for it. Microsoft releases either another connector or an upgraded version of a connector. So it's not a static landscape. These things are moving forward. By the way, just say if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Alternatively, I'm going to leave a few questions at the a few minutes at the end, rather, if there are any questions to be able to answer it. So do feel free to keep your questions until the end, or as I said, to put them in the chat. But the connectors are really key to this, because this is where we need to ensure that we need to go and work out data security, right? Modern data security. It's not walking around ensuring that your desk is clean. It's ensuring you have access, the right level of access to the right data source. You need to be in control of it. We have data in these different systems, these different islands for it. We are interacting with multiple systems, so we send and receive data to and from systems for it. We need to ensure when we're doing this, the data is exchanged with authorized systems. Now, that can be as simple as saying, you're not going to have an unauthenticated access. You need a username. So if you're connecting to Twitter, you're going to, using an automation or using an app, you're going to need to ensure that you authenticate appropriately to Twitter or to Facebook or to Azure SQL or wherever it is. So you have username and passwords in place, or you have service principals for a more secure item for it. You can use Azure Key Vault to store these credentials for it, and Power Automate or whatever it is can connect into them appropriately for it. But understanding which systems we need to authenticate into versus we shouldn't authenticate into is the first step, because we need to ensure that our company data does not leak. It does not go somewhere where it shouldn't be. It only stays within our authorized systems. It shouldn't go into an unauthorized system, because we don't want that data leakage. So we need to understand as an organization who has access to what and where they have that access. Right? Developers may just have it in development environment, not in a UAT or a prod environment, for instance. So it's understanding our user personas, what they are and what they're doing for it. Now, in the Microsoft realm, in Power Platform, there are two approaches that Microsoft takes appropriately for it. So these are tenant level and environment level in place. What are the differences between the two of these? So we're going to be looking at DLP policies, and I'm going to hopefully do a live demo, assuming everything goes well with it, to be able to show you how it goes and some of the amazing tools that we have, but we'll come onto that shortly for it. So at a tenant level, we can apply policies. Now, these can only be done by a Power Platform administrator, a Dynamics 365 administrator, or global administrator security role holders. Tenant level policies, when they are created, can be blank. You just put the policy in place as to what you want to secure. Don't worry about how you go and secure it, because I'm going to be showing this to you live in a couple of minutes for it. But you can create a blank policy for it. You can specify that a policy can apply to a single environment. You can specify it can apply to multiple environments. You can specify it can apply to all environments within the tenant, including those that haven't yet been created. When you create a new environment, it will fall under. You can ensure that some are on an exception list, so the policy will never apply to them. But that's possible to do. This is at the tenant level itself. So essentially, you have control over how it applies to environments and which environments it applies to. This can be created, edited, and viewed by any admin functionality. So global admin, Power Platform admin, Dynamics 365 admin for it. Custom connectors are starting to be able to be involved in there as well. Microsoft has released a new capability, but that's at the tenant level. They can be viewed by an environment admin, but they cannot be modified by the environment admin. So that's at the tenant level that you have. Then you have the environment level. At an environment level, all those users we mentioned already, so global admin, Power Platform admin, Dynamics 365 admin, can create, view, modify these. But an environment admin specifically, so if you have sysadmin privileges within an environment, you can go and create and modify these as well for it itself. But an environment policy only applies to the specific environment that it is created for. Hence why it's an environment level policy. In addition, it's not possible to copy or clone these over to other environments. So if you need to create these an environment level policy, it's done on a per environment basis for it. It also has more controls over custom connectors within that environment. So say you're developing something, dev environment needs a specific environment level policy. When it comes to UAT, you need that same policy in place. You may need to go ahead and create that. You would need to go ahead and create it manually. Alternatively, you could see maybe it could be something for a tenant level policy. There are a couple of differences between the two, definitely in terms of custom connectors overall for it. So two approaches. It's not about a singular approach, as we're going to be talking about in a couple of minutes. So how does this get in to actually handling the data? Well, this is what I refer to as the swim lanes or swimming lanes. So Microsoft provides three categories. We have business, we have non-business, and we have blocked. And this is around connectors, right? It's not about classifying your data. It's not about understanding your security roles. DLP is around the usage of connectors. Because if I can block your access, if I can block a connector and therefore your access to that specific data island, I don't need to worry about what data is there. You don't have access to it at all. You are unable to use it. Now, how did these categories work? Well, the blocked category is fairly obvious, I feel, because if it's blocked, you cannot use it. And then you have what we call business and non-business. And in essence, the way that these work are everything within the same category can be used with each other, but it cannot be used across categories. So for instance, here we have in business, we have Exchange, we have Dataverse, we have SharePoint, we have Excel, we have Dynamics 365, and we have Power BI. Those are in the business area. It can be right, so they can all work with each other. You could create a Power App, which goes ahead interacting with those data sources. You can create a Power Automate, not a problem, it will work. But we can also see we have Gmail in our non-business. Now, we cannot create a component. When I say component, I'm talking about a Power App or a Power Automate, for instance, which will involve SharePoint and Gmail. It's taking connectors from two different categories, from business and from non-business, and it doesn't work. You can't go out of your swim lane. So there is a need to categorize connectors appropriately for it. And this is really the way the DLP works overall. It takes a look at what you're doing and it says, is the connectors allowed? Are the connectors not allowed? In fact, it actually does that in a slightly different way, which we're going to be getting into itself. Now, it is important to know when Microsoft first released this, it was a black or white, yes or no. Can you use the connector? Can you not use the connector, on or off? And then earlier this year, Microsoft thankfully released granularity on connectors themselves, because they realized that you may actually need connectors, but you need to control the actions within, because obviously, as we know, connector has multiple capabilities for it, to read, to write, to, based on interacting with the data source, however the connector is appropriately set up for it. So they released this granularity. So what you can do is you can control each action within it itself. This allows us to be able to then turn around and say, okay, fine, you need to read from SQL Server, as an example that's here on the screen. Yeah, we can allow that, but right back to it, no, you're not allowed to do it. So you can go through each connector and put granularity in place. This is really important for it. And again, we have default controls. Do you allow new actions that are released, or do you not allow new actions that are released? In essence, when a new capability, whether it's a connector action or connector itself is released, do you automatically block it or not? In terms of the connector itself, do you allow it to be blocked? Do you set it to be blocked by default, or do you put it in business or non-business? Top tip here, do not put them automatically in the business route. Keep them in non-business or blocked, depending on how severe your data governance is in place and what they need to do. So you can mix and match this up as you need to appropriately. So what does this give us? Because this isn't just around approaching this in one way. It allows us to create something bespoke, absolutely bespoke to our needs. Here's a birthday cake that was created for my number one last year when it was her birthday, right? Absolutely bespoke unicorn cake. It looks amazing. It tasted absolutely delicious. She was delighted with it itself. But we can create something. We don't need to rely on templates that are done with other organizations. We can create something that's bespoke to our own organization as we need. We have these controls in place. But it's not just about creating one item, right? We want to think about the way that we can layer things, because DLP really is about that layering to cater for different scenarios. Now, really important is environment strategy. If as an organization you do not have an environment strategy in place, you need to have an environment strategy, because you're going to have different user personas. So you're going to have people in marketing. Marketing will probably need to interact with social media, but you don't want other people to be interacting with social media. The marketing team may have Facebook, they may have Twitter with other stuff. You don't want anybody else to create something in the Power Platform, however, that interacts with it. But DLP isn't based on users, it's based on the environments. So this comes down to environment strategy. What are your groups of users? Which systems do they need to access? And putting appropriate environments in place. And from a pro dev perspective, that could be things like having, that cadence of environments, a development environment, a test environment, a prod environment at a minimum for it, because you need to ensure that your users go and do what they need to do, business as usual for it. This is where your layering comes into approach. In your layering approach comes into effect, because what you need to do is you can set up policies and then you apply them strategically to the specific environments that you need them to, whether it's an environment level policy or it is a tenant level policy. I'm going to show how it goes. So DLP is just part of a proper environment strategy, because if you just block everything or allow, people will not be able to do their job. Now, this is really helpful as well for what we refer to as a citizen developer approach, whereby you're going ahead and you're going to ensure, you're enabling your business users to start using the capabilities of the Power Platform, the development approach for it. Because what you can do is you can provision a citizen developer environment and ensure that you essentially block everything that they do not need access to. This just ensures really that your data doesn't leak. Pro developers, you can be possibly a little more relaxed around, but again, it's thinking in the right way for it. The ability is to cater for different scenarios. So let's look at some key information around this. Really important. Number one, the most restrictive approach applies. Unlike dataverse security roles, whereby it's the highest level of security privileges across all of your security roles that you get or inherit, this is the opposite. Your most restrictive approach applies. So if you have two policies applied to an environment, one allows SharePoint and one blocks SharePoint, SharePoint will be blocked. You have the ability to use different operators to be able to tailor this appropriately. So you have the only and except operators to be able to ensure that you tailor your policies to work in the combination that you need, which is a bit more of an advanced concept itself. When it comes to Power BI, DLP for Power BI actually is handled through what is now referred to as Microsoft Purview, previously the Microsoft Compliance Center. So it's not actually handled within the Power Platform, within the capabilities I'm going to be showing you today. But it's important from a Power BI perspective to understand how this goes, because again, when you query data, you want to ensure you're querying data in the right way, because you can also use Power BI not just to display data, but to carry out other actions as well. But really importantly, and I'm going to, as I go through this with you, I'm going to show it to you, right? DLP applies immediately when you create a DLP policy and you set it to go live. When I say immediately, it's in the course of about a second and a half that I've managed to time to date. And when you create DLP policies, as we're going to see, you need to be really, really careful. I've dealt with organizations that go, well, we've got these, I think they're now 800 plus connectors. We only need access to SharePoint and Dataverse. Let's block everything else by default. Yeah. If you're already using Power Platform collateral, you're going to cause a problem because you block, it applies immediately, and your users, your owners of apps and Power Apps, Power Automate flows are going to get an email that looks like this. It's going to be suspended or stopped. So you can, and I have seen it happen once or twice, bring your organization to your knees and stop critical data operations by blocking without realizing. So in terms of an impact, how DLP policy works itself for it. So the first thing to understand is design time. Now this differs slightly based on Power Apps versus Power Automate itself for it. So within Power Apps, what you need to do is an existing Power App that's got DLP policy in place will be suspended for it. You cannot create a new Power App or modify it if it violates your DLP policy that you've got in place. And it will tell you when you try and save the app that you cannot save it. Power Automate works a little nicer in terms of the fact that you can save it. So you can create a Power Automate which violates DLP policy. It won't go live, but at least you can save it in a Power App. You cannot even save the app itself. So I can understand possibly why Microsoft has done that, but there's that. But the Power Automate flow is saved, but it is in a suspended state and it will not be able to execute until you resolve the DLP policies. When it comes to resolving DLP policies, of course, there are two ways of doing it. Either work out a different way of doing it that doesn't violate it, or go to your governance people and say, actually, you need the policy to be rescinded or changed, which could lead into a conversation which goes, is it able to be done in your existing environment? Or again, if other users in the environment shouldn't have access to this sort of thing, do you need a separate set of environments for it? Again, this goes back into environment strategy, how your data is users. Obviously, in terms of data and such, we want appropriate master data management, MDM, but so we may need to sync data between environments in order to ensure, but just allow these capabilities. So this is when you're actually going ahead and creating it for makers. What about if you're accessing an app in a runtime? Well, we've got that as well. If DLP gets put in place, that will impact a Power App negatively in terms of the Power App itself will have a violation of the policy. It will be stopped immediately. Users will get errors. An existing user will, use it in the app itself will get an error message. The app will refresh and will stop. Other users are not able to launch it. You will be able to you'll get an error message specifying that it violates the DLP policy. Contact your system admin for it. In terms of Power Automates, it's going to suspend any flows that are currently running will be suspended. No future flows will be able to be triggered. And it doesn't matter what type of flow it is. If it violates the DLP policy, that's it. Boom, you're done. It stops it immediately. And so the power of putting this in place should obviously people have the appropriate people to apply DLP policies, set them up, but they should just be very careful before they actually get it started running. Now, organizations that are new to this think, oh gosh, this seems really, really complicated. How do we go about this? Who are the right people to involve if you're new to Power Platform? But there is actually potentially in those organizations existing experts in place. So earlier on, I mentioned Power BI, which is run elsewhere. A lot of organizations are already using Power BI capabilities, but they don't necessarily consider them Power Platform specifically, but they should be actually quite familiar with the ability to use DLP through Purview, formerly the Microsoft Compliance Center. So when I always say to organizations going and taking a look at this, I turn around and say, do you have existing Power BI expertise? And usually organizations will go, yeah, we do actually have that in place. And I go, right, go talk to them, get them involved in this. So this is really a great starter for 10 for organizations that are new to DLP because they're probably quite familiar with DLP already, and they can start off the basis of the DLP team for DLP team for Power Platform. So very helpful. So with that, I've been talking for about 30 minutes or so. Hopefully this is of some interest. Again, please feel free to put questions in the chat and hopefully have a couple of questions at the end. And I'm now going to go ahead and move on to a live demo. Yes, live demo. It's early enough in the morning that I'm hoping that everything will be all right because hopefully everybody else using tech is mostly asleep. Now, part of this live demo is I'm going to be showing you how to go ahead and create DLP policies and see them natively, as well as some really, really useful tools that are around to mitigate the you're going to bring a business to its knees. So let me just bring up my demo item for it. So just give me one moment. This is in my own personal development environment, so please excuse any naming conventions that may be incorrect or silly wordage. So let's just bring this in place. There we go. Right, admin.powerplatform.com. Right, Power Platform home, Power Platform admin center home. Again, we're going to assume that you have the right level of permissions to actually go ahead and do this. Now, interesting enough, so I said that there are two approaches, which is tenant level and versus environment level. It doesn't matter if you're the sysadmin in environment. If you have one of the more global roles, you cannot create environment level policies. It's actually one of the really annoying little things. You need to have a user that just has the sysadmin privilege and doesn't have a global tenant, Power Platform admin, or Dynamics 365 admin security role. Because if you have one of those roles, it doesn't matter what else you have, you will automatically just be able to create tenant level policies. So here on the side, we've got all of our environments. We can see here we've got several environments in place. Great, several different environments. And then we've got policies here at the side. Lots of different policies available, data policies. This is the place for us here. We can see we've got various policies in place that I've created already for it. So let's go ahead. I'm going to create a new policy. I could modify an existing one, but I'm going to create a new one, say. So I'm going to give it a policy name. And what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to call this SharePoint. Then I click next. Then it's going to ask me what connectors, and we said, well, we have 839. Again, this is based on the region that I'm in. You can sure know this may be slightly different for it for each region. So I'm going to search for SharePoint. SharePoint, there we go. And it turns around and says, actually, I cannot block it because some of these, the standard Microsoft ones, right? If it's a standard connector, you cannot block it, but you can move it around. So I can say, okay, fine, you know what? I'm going to put that into my business category that's over here. But there's a variety of other stuff. Again, you can scroll through this. Now, bear in mind, there are 800, well, for me, 839 at the time. If you're starting off with DLP, you go, right, oh my gosh, let's just block all of these. Right, don't do that. You say, what are the ones that you are using as a business? Which systems are you connecting into using Power Platform? Put them into business. If you want to block things like social media, the ones you know by default you need to block, you can block those. So for instance, I go Twitter. There we go. I can say, right, so it tells me blockable, so I can go and block it. I can also configure it if I want to itself, so configure the various actions. If I want to, I'm just going to block that. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to find a random one, right, Basecamp. Configure connect, you see the actions. I can say which actions I want to allow for it in this policy. And by default, I want to allow if, Basecamp allows new connect actions, will they be enabled by default or not? All right, let's just cancel that to show you. But don't just block everything because that's the likelihood you're going to bring something to its knees here and you're not going to know. You can also set your default group up here at the top. So when a new connector is released by Microsoft, which one does it fall into? Again, don't put it to business as your default group. It should be non-business is the standard default. You can change it to block if you want to. So then you go ahead and you go, right, okay, so those are connectors done. Brilliant. Now I can put custom connectors in place if I want to. I don't have any custom connector patterns. This is the pattern that it looks like, which data group is going to be in, the host URL and the order for it. So you can do that. There is more granularity when it comes to an environment level connector. And then you turn around and you do scope. This is the important parts. 3 options. Add all environments will add for a tenant level policy. We'll add every single environment. Any new environments created will automatically fall under this as well. Add multiple environments. If you then click next, it allows you to specify which environments you want to apply it to. So this is when you're actively selecting the environments for the policy to connect to. You don't want any new environments won't fall under this unless you add it. Exclude certain environments, however, what it will do is it will apply to every single environment except the ones that you're excluding for the policy. So if I exclude Chris's environment, so I click add to policy, they're right excluded, so it will apply to 3. If a new environment is created in this tenant, it will automatically apply to the new environment as well. With Chris's environment over here, happy little environment, nothing is ever going to happen to that. Remove from policy appropriately. So this is the way the three options. Again, layering approach. You could have the same concept of blocking allowing connectors, blocking connectors, but it could be tweaked slightly, and therefore you want to apply to it in different environments in different ways. This can really scale up. And I know organizations with several thousand environments in their DLP. I mean, they have a full-time team handling and ensuring it. And then what happens is you click next, and it goes to the review stage. So it will tell you what's your name. You can edit it. What are your connectors that you're using? Out the box connectors. You can click edit to change these if you want to, basically to go back and forth in this. Essentially, this is like a business process flow, right? You can move forward between the backwards and forwards. Custom connectors, scope, and then you can click create policy. When you click this create policy, this is why I say it goes live immediately. So if for some reason you happen to decide to block SharePoint, and not block SharePoint, but you take SharePoint and put it in a category, but it doesn't have other ones in there, anything that's currently using that, any automation. So for instance, if you've got automation that's taking a look at Outlook, so emails that come in and putting it to SharePoint, and you put Outlook into business and SharePoint to non-business, or vice versa, SharePoint into business, keep Outlook in non-business, right? You click create policy, anything using that is going to start immediately failing across the entire organization. And people are going to be getting those lovely little emails that we just saw, which everyone says your item, your app, your Power Automate flow is in violation of DLP policies. So you may think, okay, so this is where traditionally everything has been done and it all works great, but you cannot see the impact of what's going on, because there's nowhere around this for you to actually be able to go ahead and say, ooh, which collateral do I have in place that this could impact? How can I understand? Especially in an organization which you may not have DLP in place already, but what you're going to be doing is you're going to be putting DLP in place, but they have been using Power Platform. How you need to do an investigation, because again, you could bring the organization to its knees and stop critical business operations. So let's just create policy. You'll go, it says creating policy, boom, and now it's live. So if I've got anything in place, it's going to be there. Modifying policies is very simple. Go into a policy appropriately for it. You can go in, you can see what it's done. I don't think I've really done much in this one. This was just an example to show up for it itself. Previous versions of this will then update it, because it's bring connectors into the policy for it appropriately. So the big question that people then said, okay, right, how can I'm really scared now about putting DLP in place. I know I need it, but it's going to bring things to its knees. So how do we go ahead and handle this? Well, I have an example to show you. So for those who are not aware, there is this marvelous thing called the Center of Excellence Starter Toolkit. The Microsoft Power Cat team, the customer advisory team, are on top of this. They create it. They have some amazing capabilities within there itself. And one of the tools that they have, this is released on a monthly cadence, by the way. If you haven't already started to look at Center of Excellence capabilities, you should definitely take a look at it. Again, it's not the technical solution, free to download, free to install, updated on a monthly cadence for it. It's not the be-all, end-all of a Center of Excellence, but it is some technical capabilities. And one thing that it includes is this DLP Editor. It's a canvas app, right? It's a really nice little canvas app. It allows us to be able to see these are our different environments. We can select an environment as we want to. We can see what's applied to the environment overall. Now, please note that this is not a absolute live view. What do I mean by this? I'm just going to refresh this page. Right. So if you create a DLP policy, it's not a live view into that policy. There are things that happen underneath. There are Power Automate flows that refresh and other things collecting the data down. And yeah, this is my dev environment, so I'm not too worried about that. But what this will do is this will be able to allow you to be able to see, again, it's a slightly behind the time cadence, because it's every time that your Power Automate runs, which is normally once every 24 hours or so, depending on how collateral you have. But this will allow you to go and see your impact. So if I click this one that says blocked at the top, so what I can do is I can actually create a new policy if I want. I can rename this policy, which will push this out. So I'm going to call this blocked test as an example. And the reason why I'm calling this block test is because if I bring up my admin view, just here at the moment, we can see this is currently called blocked. So I'm going to show you how this updates in real time. So block test, I think it was this one. Here we go. So I've got my business, my non-business, and I've got blocked in MSN weather. Right now, say I wanted to add additional thing onto it, I could. It will ask me what scope I want to do. So I can add all environments. As we said, I can put multiple environments I want to specify, or I can exclude environments as I need to. And then what it will turn around and say which environments there are, which ones are added to the policy. This is it, the impact analysis. Again, this is not real time. This is based on the data that's collected underneath. So this could be a trailing 24 to 36 hours, depending on how often it's running and how much collateral you have in place. But what it will do is it will turn around and say, apps, right? It's not got a problem with that. It's, it's all there, not a problem. Analyzed flows. It's gone through my Power Automate and it turns around to me and it says, this is a problem. And the reason is this is a Power Automate that gets the details for it. We can see blocked MSN whether it's blocked. This Power Automate uses this. Tells me the owner of it, so I could email the owner if I wanted to, send an email out there. Does not comply with the environment, please adjust it. Again, then I can send the email and it will go out. I can export all of these to CSV. So if we're creating a new DLP policy, this is actually really helpful because what it will do is it will turn around. And a good example of this is if I say my scope is going to be all environments, I'm just going to go back to my connectors. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in Dataverse. I'm going to move the Dataverse to business. So that's in businesses there. Dataverse legacy. I leave that in place. So let's just go through this. It's now analyzed everything else. And I've got, yeah, there we go. The formatting was a bit off. It's got a lot of other stuff that's going to be a problem. Immediately when I turn this on, it's going to impact all of these items. So this gives a bit more reassurance as to you can actually see the impact of a proposed change that you're going to be putting in place. Let me just go back. I'm just going to remove the, I'm just going to change this back to, there we go, move it to non-business. There we go. I'm going to leave that blocked one in place just there because I'm just going to want to apply the policy. So it should actually reanalyze this. But anyway, right. And then we can click, right? So we've got everything. We've got one in blocked. We've got one in business. That should not be a in business, right? See, there we go. Right, live business. Come on, let's move this. Move to business. Okay, that's going to have fallen over slightly. Ah, there we go. Right, it's gone and reanalyzed this itself. Analyzed all the flows that we've got. Click next. Click update policy. Boom. This will go ahead and right. Okay, well, this should have gone ahead and updated. Obviously, I've got an error that's in there for it because I've got a problem somewhere with my setup for it. But this is where we can turn around and we can go, if I just go back to DLP policies, we can help this. This kit helps us enable our organizations moving forward. Again, possibly slight trailing 24 hours based on it. It's not going to tell you apps that have been created and Power Automate flows that have been created that it could impact, that are currently being created that have not yet shown up in the Center of Excellence toolkit. So this is an example of how we can go ahead and use DLP appropriately to ensure that only our correct users have access into the systems that they need. Again, those user personas will flow through into our capabilities for our environment strategy. So with that, couple of minutes left. I think I managed to keep it in time, including the demo. So we'll leave it to any questions that are in place for it itself. Okay, so question around personal details and data credentials and credit card details secure. So in terms of credentials, you can store these, for instance, within a specific, you can store those, you could use a service principal rather than that. So it's stored so you don't have access to credentials. This is not about securing credentials. This is about securing which data sources can work together with each other for it. In terms of like credit cards, you can secure data as well. You can mask data if you want to. You're able to, although I wouldn't recommend against storing credit card details in Dataverse, but you could mask it and use column level security appropriately for it, Mohammed. In terms of your security of your data from external attacks, there are Microsoft white papers out there around it appropriately. Info, can you shed more light on GDPR? Do you want to come off mute? I'm happy to stick around for another minute or two. But do you want to explain what you mean around GDPR?
Yeah, hi, Evi. I just wanted to understand when we are talking about the data layers and the security, uh, how is that going to impact or support the GDPR rules and the regulation we have it in UK?
So GDPR perspective states that users should have appropriate access to the systems that they need access to with security in place. So if you restrict the systems that people have access to, then that through the use of connectors. I, as a user, should never have access to Twitter. I shouldn't be able to, the classic example I use is if somebody has access to your payroll and somebody has access to Twitter on social media, would you like them to create an app or create a Power Automate which publishes your payroll data onto Twitter? And the answer to that is no, that should never happen.
No.
So it's about the appropriate, which systems should be able to work together with each other, which comes under essentially supporting GDPR, because then you can ensure that you do not have your data leakage in place.
Makes sense. Okay. Thank you.
So it's not about what the actual data is. It's about which systems you can connect into and whether now you, in terms of the granularity, can you connect into them to be able to read, to be able to write, to be able to push stuff up. Each connector has different capabilities for it. Oh, that's there. In terms of the security roles, yeah, and the CCPA as well. For it, yeah, there is some impact around there as well, Mohammed. So CCPA essentially is very similar to GDPR. Um, there is nothing massively different in terms of that and the way it goes in which you would use it. It's about data governance, which DLP is a part of. In terms of the security roles, you need to create policies. As I said, for tenant level policies, it's your global tenant admin, your Dynamics 365 admin, your Power Platform admin. For an environment level policy, it's a sys admin. But what you need to ensure is if you're creating environment level policies, you don't have one of the global roles that are around for it. But if anybody, I know we're a minute or two over for it. I'm sure there's another speaker who's coming on shortly. Um, I mean, I'm right. I don't know. When does the next speaker start? Out of curiosity.
Start
Yes, it's 2 minutes over.
in few
It was
minutes now,
supposed
Eva.
no, it was supposed to join 2 minutes ago, and he already has joined.
Okay, fine. So
Okay.
I'll leave it to the next speaker. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out. I just want to be very conscious not to take time off the next speaker. But thank you so much for your attendance of all the questions. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Eva. On behalf of Pakistan User Group and all the community, it's been very useful and insight. We'll be taking obviously a lot of information away, and if